Hello and welcome to this installment of Vox Machina. As your narrator, I'll be bringing fantastic works of fiction from the page to your eardrums. Uploads will be posted weekly, so be sure to subscribe and hit the alerts bell to be notified when new installments are available. Got a story you think deserves the Vox Machina treatment? Let me know in a comment and you might just hear it in a future episode. Thanks for listening and on with the show. Hi listeners, this episode will have some not safe for work content, so please listen at your own risk. Thanks. Every New Beginning by Fencer X. Episode 18. Before he would release Harry back to Transfiguration, Draco wanted abject assurance that this business, as he put it, had never happened in Harry's original timeline. Harry therefore had to awkwardly but vehemently reassure him that no, he definitely had not, would never have, even if opportunity had presented itself. Never? Draco said, with the gall to sound offended. You certainly seemed hard up for it from where I was seated. Harry did not remind him that realistically most any bloke would have been hard up for it with another warm body ruddying so sweetly and fervently atop his cock. Well, you were a horrid little shit, he said instead, which in retrospect was not much better. And then you were a literal Death Eater, and then you fled the country, and then you got caught up with the Neo-Death Eaters, and then you were in Azkaban, and then you were dead. What exactly was I supposed to entertain thoughts that maybe I might fancy you a little? He heaved a dramatic huff, ruffling his hair with one hand. He really needed a shower, but there was no time if he wanted to be present for any of the Transfiguration lesson at all. McGonagall was a stickler for attendance and demanded thorough explanations for any tardiness and absences, though he could, he supposed, tell her in all honesty he'd gone to see how Draco was handling the news of his father's passing. Draco boggled. You fancy me? Hypothetically speaking. The conversation was rapidly getting away from him. Well, now you make it sound like you don't like me very much at all, Draco sniffed. And after your insistence on calling me your friend, too. Inconstance is very unbecoming, you know. Harry rolled his eyes. Obviously I like you. Do you, now? Unbelieving if Harry had ever heard such a tone. Think I walk around pulling off anyone who trods across my path? Thought you did it to make a point. Harry shrugged. It can be a bit of both. Truthfully, he was quite sure he was going to be stuck unpacking the breadth and depth of his feelings for Draco until next Christmas, but fancy sounded so very sophomoric, like they were in school. And, well, all right, they were in school, but still. He sighed. Anyway, the point is no. This didn't happen before, and I can't see any way it ever could have happened. Draco winced, just a subtle twinge at Harry's proclamation, and that was something else he was going to have to unpack later. So between the two of us, we've made the impossible possible. Think of it that way. He really needed Draco to do away with the idea he wasn't in control of his fate, that he couldn't change things if he didn't like how he knew they might otherwise turn out. This entire endeavor only worked if they put their heads together and made it work. They had to both want it, to both believe in it, else there was no point. Father still died, Draco said, and Harry moved to stand in front of him, taking him by the shoulders and giving him a little shake. Just because some things match up doesn't mean they all will. We have breakfast every morning, just like we did in 8th year my first time around. It doesn't mean anything, it's just something we've chosen not to change. Choices matter. Will matters. Wanting matters. He let his hands fall away. And I reckon you're not one to sit idly by and let what you want slip through your fingers. Draco brushed imagined lint from his shoulders, readjusting the fold of his robes with a lifted brow. Well, now you're definitely propositioning me. You told me to find something you might say yes to. So I did. He then felt compelled to add, but just so we're clear, I wasn't propositioning you before. Draco gave a half shrug. Pity. As I told you, I might have been receptive. Sensing a weak point, Harry needled. Now, who fancies who? Oh, I wouldn't say fancy, but... Draco favoured him with an appraising look. You clearly have your uses. Harry swallowed, the tone of the conversation taking a tangible turn that parts of Harry were rapidly getting on board with. But Draco waved him away with a dismissive gesture and flopped down in a sprawling pose across the length of his freshly conjured acid green divan. Harry didn't doubt that shortly all of the recently destroyed furniture would find its way back into the room. On your way now, you're missing Transfiguration. Fuck it all, he was. And his Transfiguration marks had taken a hit of late as DA meetings had picked up in the new term, the looming defense owls and newts demanding more from the students than their official curriculum had prepared them for. McGonagall really needed to appoint a new full-time professor and stat. Harry wiped a hand over his face with a groan. I'll see you after, then? I've ancient runes in the afternoon, Potter, you know that. Oh, yeah, obviously, I meant after that. Draco was leering at him now, looking unaccountably amused as he hung over the arm of the divan. Why, got something planned, have you? Gryffindors don't really do plans, as I'm sure you've discovered. Harry stuffed his hands in his pockets, traipsing backwards for the door. We're more of the pull-something out of our arse sort. Drats, Draco said, reaching for a leather-bound text and conjuring a sheaf of parchment and handsome harpy feather quill for note-taking. I prefer the stick-something-in-the-arse sorts. Harry went for the door straight away before he locked himself in the room and never left. Their fitful session on the armchair was not, Harry would discover, the mark of any great change in their relationship. They did not hold hands, they did not take meals together, and Draco still refused to visit the Gryffindor common room. He would not call Harry by his given name, and he did not flirt with Harry very much more now than he had before Lucius's death. They did, however, have rather a lot of sex, which was about the greatest change in their relationship Harry thought he could handle at the moment, so all the other stuff could wait until he'd gotten used to this much, he figured. Harry made the wretched mistake, though, of confessing to Draco, and sexual duress, mind, that he'd never done half the things they'd done together with another living soul. Never? Draco breathed, lifting up off Harry's cock with wide eyes and puffy lips. You've never been sucked off, not even by Girl Weasley. Harry shook his head frantically, pounding the corded upholstery of Draco's lovely green divan. Never. Now, get back to it? Come on, you've had me edging for 10 minutes now. Draco hummed softly, keeping his grip firm about the base of Harry's cock. She seemed fond enough of you, for reasons I could never fathom. Too many overprotective brothers hovering about to find any privacy, then? Fuck it, he wasn't going to leave off until Harry gave him a story that satisfied, was he? We got together 6th year. I was preoccupied, you'll recall. Stalking me. Harry was too horny to argue the point. So we never really got beyond snogging. Then I went off with Hermione and Ron for... He only just kept himself from giving away more than he'd meant to. For war preparations. And then, after the Battle of Hogwarts, he grimaced and he could feel his cock starting to wilt. He really didn't want to be having this conversation just now. They'd been on their way to a spectacular pair of orgasms just a moment ago, and now unpleasant memories were robbing him of all ardor. I already told you about that. Draco gave his cock a few gentle, teasing pumps to keep him interested. So, not for lack of interest, then. Do I look uninterested to you? Harry huffed. I recall some mention of being too busy, as if there's such a thing. He knew he wasn't explaining himself well. It helped nothing most of the blood was pooling in his south head at the moment, leaving little for his north head to deal with. I know that I could have easily gone to a seedy club and pulled someone. Don't be daft, you're Harry fucking Potter. You could have walked to the corner and dropped trow and found a line of willing mouths that stretched around the block. But that's... He licked his lips, firming his jaw defensively. It's not for me. That sort of thing. And Draco rolled his eyes, shifting on his knees where he knelt between Harry's splayed legs. Even with a cushioning charm, Harry didn't imagine it was all that comfortable. That sort of thing. Heavens forfend our patron St. Potter sully himself with an alleyway tug. It's not that, Harry protested weakly. I like... Draco lifted a brow, waiting with frustratingly unending patience. I like knowing them. Them? My partner, whoever I'm with, I want to... Harry swallowed. I want to know them. I want them. For them. Not because they're a warm hand or mouth or whatever. I want to be a match. Draco breathed, staring up at him, searching. Yeah. Draco softly cleared his throat. Foolish romantic. With notions like that, it's no wonder you never got laid. And it's looking like I'm never going to get blown, either. He nudged Draco's shoulder with his knee. Should I pull myself off? Draco let his head drop forward, leaning in to rub the velvet shaft of Harry's cock gently against his cheek, and near worshipful as he whispered with an arousal ragged voice, Don't you dare. Harry imagined this was what they'd had in mind when they'd coined the word fellatio. There was blowing and sucking, which somehow in this context meant the same thing, strangely, and giving head and all those colourful terms boys sniggered about in the dark corners of the Quidditch locker rooms or around the common room fire late on a Friday evening after a few thimbles of fire whiskey. Base, crude, but not inaccurate. This, though, it was an art form, and Harry was an exceedingly receptive audience, so he sat back and watched Draco work his magic. In no time at all, Draco had, between his nimble fingers and sinful tongue, brought Harry back to a handsome erection, though he was, if possible, working Harry even more slowly than before. Harry thought to complain. Draco certainly never held back in letting Harry know when he wasn't satisfied with his attentions, but Draco seemed engrossed in his task, as if there were no place he'd rather be in that moment than sat between Harry's legs, his lips wrapped around Harry's cock. Draco laved a long stripe from the little divot where Harry's bollocks met the base of his shaft and up to the crown, where he pressed a soft kiss to the red, leaking tip. He blew gently over it, grinning to himself, when Harry's hips gave a little answering jerk, then slowly, achingly took Harry fully into his mouth. Harry wanted to curse, loud and long and full, when he felt the teasing graze of Draco's teeth just at the lip of the crown, silent reminder that he was exceedingly vulnerable right now, and Draco could cut him deep in more ways than one if he wanted. But he didn't seem to want. No, instead he seemed to only care about Harry's pleasure in making this experience quite everything Harry might have imagined it to be. Sure, he had never imagined Draco Malfoy would be involved, but he was not disappointed in the least now it was happening. With one hand, Draco teased the curve of Harry's bollocks, beginning to draw up tight against his cock, and with the other, he traced the muscle of Harry's inner thigh, slender fingers carding through the thatch of black hair carpeting his groin. Harry sighed, head thrown back, and lost himself in his senses. The sounds of appreciative little grunts and enthusiastic suckling, the musky scent of sweat and slick mingling, the feel of Draco's rough tongue and smooth lips gliding over his cock and fingers brushing against it. Harry gave a jolt, reflexively tugging his legs in and bracketing Draco's shoulders. Draco lifted off. What? He asked, breathy and annoyed. You... Harry swallowed, thoughts whirling. You touched me. Of course I touched you. Good gad, what did you think I was doing? No, I mean you... He forced his legs back open, trying to relax. I wasn't expecting you to, there. Draco's gaze darted down and then back up, lips pursed primly, but without a hint of guilt. He gently scritched the great vein under Harry's cock like it was a lap neasel. Did you not like it? I didn't say... It was just... unexpected, Draco finished. Well, now you know to expect it. So may I? When Harry didn't respond as quickly or enthusiastically as Draco had evidently hoped, he pressed, I'd like to. You'll like me to as well, I'm sure. Harry started, not entirely sure how he wanted to finish it. There are things, Draco said, head cocked to lean against the inside of Harry's thigh as he lazily massaged the cock in his hand, that I only like to do, or have done, if I know my partner too. He nuzzled the soft skin just at the crease where Harry's leg blended into his groin. When I want them. Harry shivered despite himself and frowned. Thought you said it was a foolish romantic notion. It is, Draco shrugged. Mayhaps we're a match after all, then. He shifted back, pressing a butterfly kiss to the head of Harry's cock and inhaling. A little dribble of slick bubbled up in response, and Harry's stomach muscles jumped. Draco lifted his brows in question, and Harry nodded, heart thudding in his chest. He didn't think he could watch, though. There was fantasizing about this sort of thing, and then there was the actual doing of it. And Gryffindor though he might be, Harry was not yet quite so brave as to confront what exactly it was that was happening. It fascinated him, of that there could be no doubt, and he absolutely wanted to try it. It was only, well, it was new, novel, letting someone touch him like he'd never even touched himself before, and ever so much more intimate than a hand or even lips on your bits. "Eyes, Potter," Draco said, voice thick and gruff and commanding, and Harry's head snapped up. He'd set aside his glasses, so everything had a lovely blur that helped him feel apart from the activities, but Draco didn't seem inclined to let Harry wholly dissociate. "Do be present when someone's being so kind as to get you off." I wasn't. "I know what you weren't, but all the same." He swallowed, then added, low and ashamed, "Please." Harry's heart, already racing, did a somersault, clinching in his chest, and Harry nodded. "Of course." This seemed to satisfy, and Harry watched fixated as Draco returned to his task with renewed vigour. Draco had the room conjure him a stoppered jar of a clear, viscous liquid whose purpose Harry could fairly well guess, and he fought the instinct to look away, cheeks heating. Draco would, there was no doubt, take all of the piss out of him later for what must have seemed prudish, Puritan sentiments, but it wasn't that. It was only Draco. Someone usually so stiff and staid, who held himself with such poise, willingly dissembling and debasing himself like this. Henry half thought he'd rather the positions be reversed, if only because that was something Harry thought he could better wrap his head around. Draco ate his pasties with a fork, for fuck's sake. The idea of him touching Harry like that. "You'll want to relax," Draco said, lips curved in faint amusement, "else you won't enjoy it half as much." "I'll try." Harry nodded again, mostly for himself. "Why?" Draco leaned back, dropping Harry's cock altogether. It bobbed piteously between his legs, leaking on the upholstery of Draco's hideous green divan. "Don't bullshit me, Potter." Harry frowned, and Draco continued with pursed lips. "If you don't want to do this—" "I do," Harry protested, perhaps too hotly. "I do. I mean, I don't not want to." Just the sort of full-throated enthusiasm for bedroom play that really gets me hard. Harry despaired. If he wasn't straight about this, if he didn't explain himself properly, well, then it was never going to happen at all, was it? Draco was, despite himself, too much of a decent sort to touch Harry if he thought him at all reluctant, even if Harry himself felt a bit of a push might be necessary on some fronts. He wiped a hand over his face, gesturing vaguely to his crotch. "It's only... there are spells for this sort of thing, aren't there? I don't see why you'd want to." And then Draco was laughing at him. Only a sly, derisive little chuckle, but genuine as anything, and Harry's heart did more acrobatics. I realize the irony of someone like me saying this sort of thing, but there are times it's nicer to not use magic, you know? Of course I know that. Do you? Because, yes, there's spells to get you slick, there's spells to diddle yourself with, there's spells to turn your wand into a hippogriff dick if you're so inclined. Harry boggled, and he held up a finger to ask Draco to go back to the hippogriff dick bit, because that needed some explaining, but Draco barreled on, earnest. But there's also a spell to summon the snitch, so why not use it? Harry swallowed thickly, cheeks still warm. He wanted to look away, but Draco did not seem of a mind to let him. Not half as fun. Would defeat the purpose. And there's something to be said for exerting yourself. Taking what you want with your own hands. He punctuated his words by reaching out for Harry's cock again, greeting it with a flirtatious caress that promised more very soon. Harry's blood thrilled at the thought, and he felt his own mischievous nature rally. Bold words for someone I beat to the snitch 9 games out of 10. Draco curled his fingers around his cock, giving a warning tug that towed the line between pleasure and pain. Bold words for someone whose cock I'm about to swallow. He gave Harry an appraising look. I am going to get to finish this time, aren't I? Awfully keen, are you? Draco refreshed the cushioning charm under his knees, settling back into position. You aren't the only one who's been edging for the past 10 minutes. He wasted no more time, and Harry did his very best to sit back and let Draco do what he wanted to do. He was delightfully distracted from any remnant misgivings when Draco swallowed him down nearly to the darkened curlies, as if to boast, "Now this is a gag reflex to be proud of," before drawing off and working with rather more diligence at the tip. With his free hand he attended Harry's bullocks, dipping his fingertips in the jar of lubricating paste the room had provided, and letting the bulbous little nub slide through his pinched fingers in a way that made Harry's toes curl. He did not flinch this time when Draco nudged aside Harry's bullocks and traced a slick finger over the sensitive strip of skin just behind, reaching into the dark little divot. Harry watched because Draco had asked him to, and heard the whispered wandless cleaning charm before he felt it, a cool brush of magic that left him feeling thoroughly evacuated and minty fresh. It was not, suffice it to say, how Harry had expected his Christmas gift to be used, and he wondered if Draco had been practicing that particular spell for any special purpose. Having never received fellatio before, nor given it, Harry could not comment on Draco's technique beyond an incoherent stream of blathering that he hoped Draco took for the high praise it was meant to be. It was difficult to focus on much else, even the discomforting sensation of a finger poking about around his asshole, when Draco's lips and tongue and even a cheeky bit of teeth were doing the things they were to Harry's cock. It was all slick and hot and wet and tight and slow enough Harry didn't feel in danger of embarrassing himself by popping too early, but not enough he was achieving any manner of satisfaction. He wanted more and faster and rougher until he whited out, even as he wanted it to keep going and going and going and never ever end. His lids drooped, and he could feel the heat rising from his cheeks, but never did he let his eyes drift from the sight of Draco's white blonde head bobbing in his lap. Couldn't have, even if he'd wanted to, honestly. He felt a great swell of pity for the Harry Potter who'd been here before, who might have gone his whole life not only never experiencing this, but never so much as wanting to. Harry hadn't wanted it either before, and now that he saw in living colour what he'd been missing, there was a funny pit forming in his stomach, like a bullet dodged when he hadn't even heard the gun fire. All thoughts of bullets and what might not have been, though, were abruptly chased away when Draco rubbed the pad of one finger over the furled opening, pressing just enough he got Harry's attention. Draco glanced up with another testing pass to check Harry was actually going to let him. "Scared, Potter?" "You wish," came the reflexive reply, and he settled back into the cushions, splaying his legs wider. "Show me what all the fuss is about." Draco took hold of Harry's shaft in one hand, steadying it as he bobbed up and down, and with the other continued his furtive explorations. Harry tried very hard not to think about where Draco was rooting about, and instead focused on how it felt. Except, well, it mostly just felt weird. Not bad, but certainly not good. Like he'd been in the middle of taking a shit, but it was drawing back inside. He made a face, wondering if he ought to move his hips a bit. He had that some angles felt better than others, and that there was supposed to be one position you could adopt where it felt fucking fantastic. He was keen to find that one, and wondered if Draco knew what he was doing, fiddling about down there. Draco struck up a rhythm with his head bobbing, stroking in with his finger a bit deeper on each pass as he bore down on Harry's cock, then up and out again. Harry wondered what it might feel like if it weren't Draco's mouth he had wrapped round his cock, but something tighter, hotter, and altogether more intimate. Would they wind up doing that? It was another one of those things that both titillated and terrified. The idea of being that close with someone after spending his whole life apart sent a thrill through Harry. It'd be an entirely different closeness from what he shared with Ron and Hermione, something new and fascinating, but ever so intimidating all the same. Scared, Potter? Oh, absolutely. But a healthy amount of fear was a good thing, he'd always maintained, and sheer terror had never stopped him from rushing in headlong before, now had it. Draco had worked his finger into the second knuckle by now, gently stroking Harry from the inside with an easy rhythm he reflected with his lips and throat, drawing out just to the tip before sliding back in again. It tickled a bit, to be honest, the fingering, not the filleting, and Harry had to fight not to fidget or risk Draco getting the wrong idea. "Holy shit!" Harry gasped, hips bucking and nearly shoving the whole of his cock down Draco's throat. It was only a firm, steady grip about the base of his cock helping Draco follow the movement in a smooth motion before pulling off entirely that spared him from a nasty sore throat that Madame Pomfrey would surely have seen right through. And that, reporter, is what they created the self-diddling spells for. Harry's thighs were trembling as he gingerly sank back down, breath coming in short, sharp pants. How'd they ever manage to stop testing them long enough to write them down? Draco's smile was entirely too self-satisfied, and he gently guided Harry back into position, coating his fingers in more of the lubricating paste and returning to his task with a renewed enthusiasm that Harry worried he wouldn't be able to keep up with. He kept on with the rhythmic fingering and filleting, but now he'd shown Harry what he was building up to. He allowed himself to be a bit more rough with his ministrations, his technique a tad sloppier. Harry wasn't complaining, though. He wasn't doing much of anything, really, because everything was coming at him hard and fast now. Lips and tongue and fingers and heat and slick and pleasure that struck like a bolt of lightning before disappearing just as abruptly, leaving behind tingling chills like rolling thunder. Harry's muscles ached from the tension with which he held himself, but it was reflex. He couldn't relax. Everything was tightening and drawing in, and not yet there, but close, so close. And Harry just wanted to let go, wanted Draco to let him go. Draco, come on. He reached out, threading his fingers through Draco's hair and trying not to yank it out by the root. I need to... Seriously. Draco drew off, leering up at Harry with bright, sharp eyes. His cheeks were cherry red and his lips plump and shining with a sheen of saliva. He licked them, then swallowed thickly. Need to what? He crooked his finger and Harry shuddered with a gasp. Use your words. Let's not be barbaric now. Need to fucking come, obviously. Is it obvious? He continued to massage the delicate little nub he'd found in his probing about, and Harry's thoughts went white. Tell me again. Let me, Harry pleaded, his own voice falling foreign on his ears. He'd never begged in his life, yet here he was, quite literally wrapped around Draco's finger. Let me, please. I'm the only one, aren't I, to ever see you like this? Yes, Harry huffed, half mad with arousal. I told you. And you're the only one to have ever seen me at my worst. He gave Harry's cock a rough stroke. So we're even now. Harry squirmed. Not a competition. Everything's a competition of some sort, Potter. Do be serious. Not a competition. Not even. He repeated, insistent, and he settled one hand over Draco's around his shaft, showing him how he wanted to be stroked, since they seemed to be having a difference of opinion on several matters at the moment. But a match. Draco released a defeated whine and squeezed hard enough Harry winced before immediately releasing him with a hissed oath by way of apology. He reached up, snagging Harry by the tie and drawing him close enough to kiss. His breath smelled less than fragrant, but Harry supposed that was to be expected and kissed him anyway, since he seemed to be a bit desperate for it. They kissed deep and rough and graceless, and the calloused pad of Draco's finger rubbed furiously over that angry little spot inside of Harry that made him see stars. He bucked, huffing and keening into Draco's mouth as their kisses devolved into mashed lips and tongue and teeth, neither entirely in their right mind. Harry's arm came up around Draco's shoulder, clutching him close as his orgasm swept through at last, hips jerking and teeth clacking against Draco's with the shudders racking his body. He thought he'd probably spurred it all over Draco's front, mussing his shirt with white stripes of spunk, but for once Draco was beyond carrying, immediately shoving his hand into his own trousers, getting a hand on himself to stroke to completion. Harry brought both hands to bear, cupping Draco's face and kissing with a much more practiced technique now he was coming down off his high. He stroked slow and lazy and carefully, tasting himself and Draco on the tip of his tongue and between his lips and behind his teeth. He kissed not because he wanted to, even though he did, but again to prove a point. They weren't just even. They were a match, like he'd said. Even implied they were the same, and that was so far from the reality of the situation it was laughable. But a match? Oh, that was perfect. It really was. And how had Harry never seen it like that?
Two people who never got on, who always clashed and brought out the absolute worst in one another, until they finally figured out how they were meant to fit together. And then everything just slid into place, slotted together like they'd been carved from the same block. Two faces on opposite sides, never meant to meet, and yet here they were. Harry, fuck. Draco whined against his lips, arm jerking furiously as he worked himself. I can't. Harry cocked his head to the side, leaning in to press a kiss just to the bit of skin in front of Draco's ear, then whispered, rough and ragged, "Then don't." And Draco didn't, convulsing in Harry's embrace and spurting in his pants. He did that rather a lot, which had surprised Harry initially. He thought someone as prissy as Draco might care more about soiling their undergarments, but now just made him wonder if he didn't like others seeing his bits. Who was the Puritan prude now? Draco sank back down to his knees and slumped into the cradle made by Harry's legs, sagging in exhaustion. His lids fluttered sleepily, and Harry wondered if he ought to cast a cleaning charm for them. He'd preferred to shower after a good wanking session, but he'd yet to figure out how the girls back in 7th year had convinced the room to provide toilet facilities, and the most he or Draco had been able to manage was a chamber pot they simply vanished once their needs had been met. But his wand was in his trousers, which Draco had stripped off and tossed over his shoulder. He might have used Draco's wand, but the Hawthorn wand was resting in its case, tucked away in a drawer of one of the several writing desks littering the room, and the Ministry wand could only perform rudimentary scouring charms, which were not meant to be cast anywhere near sensitive body parts. "Summon my wand for me?" he asked, giving his knee a bounce to jostle Draco awake. "Summon it yourself," Draco groused, voice raspy. "You know I'm pants at wandless casting. Do your fancy cleaning charm on me. I'm all sticky." Draco lifted his head, eyes squinting and nose wrinkling. "Merlin's balls, the afterglow's wasted on you, isn't it?" "Afterglow?" Harry quirked a brow. "Gonna crawl up into my lap while we whisper sweet nothings into each other's ears?" And to his surprise, Draco did crawl up into his lap, unfolding his long legs with nary a wince and settling draped across Harry on the couch. He waved a hand over himself with a whispered incantation, and the dark spot over his crotch and the lines of spunk scattered over his shirt front vanished. After a moment's consideration, as if deciding whether or not Harry deserved it, he did the same for Harry, sending his magic skittering over Harry's bare skin and leaving a pleasant tingling sensation in its wake. Harry shivered, grinning. "Brilliant. Thanks." "Hush," Draco said, laying a nuzzling little kiss over the sensitive bit of skin just below Harry's ear. It sent a painful shiver down his spine, still too sensitive in his refractory period. "More sweet nothings." Harry found he didn't rightly know what exactly qualified as a sweet nothing, but he supposed a compliment was warranted. "That was, nice." "Nice?" Draco drew back, lip curled, and he boxed Harry's ear. "It was fucking amazing. Try and tell me otherwise, I challenge you." "First off, ow, that fucking hurt. And second..." Harry pursed his lips, dropping his voice. He didn't know why, it just didn't seem like the sort of thing you said at a normal volume. "All right, yes, it was great. I quite liked it." "You quite liked it?" What was he meant to say? Harry rolled his eyes and huffed. "Shall I compose poetry about it? Have Peeves swing from the chandelier in the great hall and recite it at dinner time? There once was a young man from Slytherin, whose fingers were perfect for diddlin'." Draco made a face, shaking his head. "Good gad, that's horrible. Slytherin and diddling don't even rhyme." "Oh, apologies, I can't claim to hold a candle to your poetic genius." "Oh, come now, that would have been asking for a miracle." He gave Harry a searching, sidelong look. "You're all right, then?" "All right," Harry snorted. "Feeling pretty fantastic, really." He squirmed a bit, wincing. "Feels a little weird down there still, but..." He shrugged. "I think I see what the fuss is about now." Draco lifted a brow. "You really think anyone's making a fuss about one measly little finger?" Harry felt his ears get hot. "Well, no, of course not, but it's a start, isn't it?" He studied Draco carefully. Did you want me to stick your finger up my arse?" Well, that answered that question. There was evidently no delicate or genteel way of describing the act, else he was certain Draco would have used it, somehow making it sound like taking tea with the minister. Draco settled one arm over the back of the couch, propping his head up, cool as anything. Did you want to? Harry's first instinct was to say no, of course not, but when he stopped thinking about what he'd be doing and concentrated more on what he'd be seeing, what sorts of reactions it might draw from Draco, his throat went dry and he could but nod helplessly. Draco snorted softly. Noted. But steady on. We'll work our way up to it. No need to be Gryffindors about this business after all. For once, Harry agreed. Suppose there's something to be said for taking it slowly. Indeed, but not too slowly. Draco fixed him with a sharp look. I won't expect all this dithering when it's my turn. I know what I'm about, and you'd better as well, or else I'll put those self-diddling spells to good use. He rolled off of Harry and up onto his feet, smoothing the wrinkles from his uniform. And I won't let you watch. Right. Harry was definitely going to have to brush up on his wantless cleaning charms.
Harry had never been remotely sexually adventurous before. His celebrity meant that even if he'd been amenable to it, a fun one-night stand with any old witch or wizard had been out of the question, unless he wanted to relive the experience in living colour on the front page of the next day's Prophet. There were muggles, of course, but like he'd told Draco, he liked to feel something for the person he was with. Something more tangible than could be gleaned from a your place or mine, or a silently crooked finger from a stranger across a bar. And he did feel that something for Draco. He didn't quite know what it was, ineffable and inexplicable, but it was something, and it was enough. Draco would not sell his story to the Prophet, even though he'd done just that once upon a time, so Harry really shouldn't have been quite so trusting, and he would not do anything to fracture this fragile connection they'd forged, not least of all because they were close enough now they could do each other grievous harm, so it served them well to take care with one another. He would not push, at least not more than Harry could take, and wasn't that the entire point? A challenge he could meet that wouldn't subsume him. A match. But only inside this room, an insidious little voice whispered to Harry, nipping away at the fuzzy good feelings that had been buzzing about his head. He'd been hearing that voice a lot more lately, and too often for comfort it sounded like Draco. Perhaps because it was just the sort of thing Draco would say, had said, in a way, every time he turned down an invitation to lunch at the Gryffindor table, or organise another Hogsmeade outing, or join Harry and Ron for a post-prandial game of wizarding chess back in their common room. The room was as much his prison as his sanctuary these days, and Harry was, as ever, his one and only request. Despite his reassurances to Draco, though, Harry did catch himself wondering in idle moments if there hadn't been some way, somehow, this might have ever happened in his own timeline. Of course, not towards the end there, once things had spiraled beyond control, but perhaps if Draco had quietly continued his community service after graduating Hogwarts. He might have worked on the custodial staff at the ministry, and perhaps he and Harry might have run into one another when Harry hung back after hours doing research for a case. Or maybe he would have buckled down and continued his education, going on to a residency at St. Mungo's. Harry certainly spent enough time there, they might have been best mates by now. Or setting up his own magical mending shop. He was very resourceful when it came to repairs, after all. It hadn't happened, no, but it could have. That Harry was sitting here, bare-ass naked, on a hideous green divan, still marvelling at the vivid flesh memory of Draco's slender fingers poking about his arse, was testament enough to that. So that insidious little voice could shove it. There were no limits, certainly none that Harry had ever recognized. So maybe only inside this room for now. But not forever. He'd see to that. Because this, tentative and fresh and novel as it was, could not possibly be contained. It was the first time something had really been new for the both of them, completely unexpected and seemingly impossible, and it fired Harry's blood, excitement thrilling through him at for once not knowing what might come next. He'd spent so much time worrying about changing Draco's life for the better, he'd never stopped to really consider how his own life was changing as well. Not his future, perhaps, but himself, who he was, what he wanted. Rough fabric struck him in the face before plopping into his lap, his trousers chucked at him by Draco. You'll be late for charms if you don't stop your daydreaming. Harry shook out the material, towing his pants and trousers on in one go. How come you're never almost late for anything? Good breeding. Time management is in my blood. That doesn't make any sense. Where had his shoes gone? He fished around in his pocket for his wand, summoning them, and nearly getting brained by a trainer zooming for his head. Are you even taking any classes besides arithmancy? I feel like that's the only class I ever see you studying for. Think I made up ancient runes just to fuck with you, do you? You'd do that, Harry muttered under his breath, tugging his undershirt on over his head. His glasses caught on the collar and he winced. When he finally managed to pull it down, smoothing the fabric, Draco was stood before him, holding Harry's schoolbag out for him. He might have been touched by the gesture, were Draco not wearing an expression of mild disgust in holding the bag at arm's length, as if its faux leather make offended his sensibilities. Harry snatched it up, slinging it over his shoulder. Thanks. Well, I certainly won't be responsible for you failing your newt. What would the world do without the dashing crack or a Harry Potter? Maybe save itself for once? He bumped Draco's shoulder as he made for the door, turning on his heel and giving a salute as he backed out the door. Have fun in whatever made-up class you're whiling away your afternoons at. Draco showed him a couple of fingers, and Harry practically bounced down the 7th floor corridor to Charms, a spring in his step and a full-faced grin on his lips.